welcome everyone to this afternoon's session. I think I'm supposed to say order at the beginning of it. Thank you all for coming to give evidence before us today. I'm aware that I think Maryam Namazi needs to leave by 3 o'clock.
I'm fine now. I've
delayed
my train.
We very much appreciate it. Thank you very much for your kindness. But we do obviously have a series of different panels before us, so we will try to move as swiftly as possible through each of the panels today. Can I just begin by asking each of you to just briefly tell us your view of the role of Sharia councils in Britain today? Zlakha, Ahmed.
Okay, so we're a domestic violence support organisation based in South Yorkshire, and we've been running for 22 years, and we've been supporting about 60 women who've gone through the Islamic Sharia courts, councils, in terms of their Islamic divorces. So the role that our organisation has had is, if the woman has been interested in wanting to find out about how she can take forward an Islamic divorce, we've referred her into a council and then helped her get her Islamic divorce.
And what's your view of the role that councils play?
Okay, so if for the majority of those women, probably 99% of those women, if they hadn't gone through the Sharia courts and got that Islamic divorce, they would have remained in what we call limping marriages. So they would have remained within abusive relationships, either where the husband would have left, be living with another woman, she'd be doing the housework, treated as a slave, and she wouldn't feel that she Islamically was allowed to leave that marriage. So even if when the civil divorce may have happened. So the role of the Islamic Sharia councils in that respect is being able to give, for women who faith is important, a solution to get out of a situation that they would otherwise be tied to for the rest of their lives.
Thank you. And can you, just as a supplementary, tell me, do you think that Sharia councils discriminate against women?
Yes, there are certain behaviours that need challenging, yes. Yeah.
Okay, Shaista, Gohir.
Okay, so in terms of Sharia councils, 90% of their caseload is Sharia divorce. Most of their clients are Muslim women, so the role they play is around Sharia divorce. So what we really should be talking about is Sharia divorce, and I think what the two inquiries I feel that are missing is that Sharia divorce isn't just, that service isn't just operated by Sharia councils. Sometimes mosques have a Sharia divorce service, and sometimes individual imams and scholars have a Sharia divorce service. So if we are looking at how can we tackle this issue of discrimination of women during the Sharia divorce process, we also need to be looking at the other two services as well. So that's the key point. Why do women go there? When women get married, they will have a religious marriage. So once that union breaks down, her only option to get out of that religious marriage is to go and get a religious divorce. Now, where some women will only have just a faith-based marriage, so that's their only option. Now, if women have also had a civil marriage, they will go to the civil court, they will get a civil divorce. Now, I feel that civil divorce should also count as an Islamic divorce, because actually, if I went to Pakistan with that civil divorce, it would count as an Islamic divorce. So when you go to the Sharia councils, really what this should probably do is just say it counts, and if the woman, and this actually there's a demand for it, the woman herself will probably want that Islamic stamp of approval, even if the imam said, you know what, this counts, not that they do, they should. She will still want that, and this is, by the way, women across the religious spectrum, but also across educational backgrounds. You know, women with PhDs will want that Islamic stamp of approval. Not only so she can kind of feel that she can move on and she's completely free, but also in the eyes of the community and the family. So if she did not get that religious divorce, if she said, look, I've got my civil divorce, in the eyes of the community and her family, she will just still be seen as married, and she's not going to be able to move on and get married again should she want to do that. So the role they play really is around that, and yes, there is discrimination, but what I do want to be clear is that I think it's unfair to say that every Sharia divorce user has a terrible service, because some actually have quite a quick, speedy service and they get their divorce very quickly. However, significant numbers, and we don't know how many, because on our helpline we get called on this, and we get 39 issues, and Sharia divorce issues are in the top 5. But those who have a positive experience aren't going to call us up and say, do you know what, I had a really quick divorce. So yes, there are issues that do need to be challenging, so we welcome both inquiries, and absolutely we do need to look at why in the same Sharia, there's no such thing as bad and good Sharia councils, because sometimes, oh, that's a good one, that's a bad one. Actually, we have had good and bad from all of them, and I think what we need to try and pin down is why Muslim women can go to the same service and some get a good service and some get a terrible treatment. We need to unpick why that is.
Okay, we'll come back to the detail. Dr. Elham Manea.
Thank you very much. In a country that prides itself in respect of human rights and women's rights, it's very interesting to see that many women of Islamic faith are left in a system that more or less abuses them. We're talking here about a situation where instead of having one law applied to each one, we have a situation where women are more or less pushed to use a certain parallel system of justice. When it comes to this respect, I appeal to you to consider the type of law that we're talking about that is being applied. Why is there kind of like abuse taking place? Yes, women are going there because they would like to get a religious divorce. Sometimes they find the only recourse there in these Sharia council in order for them to get a divorce. I understand that. But at the same time, the type of Islamic law that is being implemented in these Sharia councils is very often what one could call an anthropological type of Islamic law. Something that is taken out of its context and implemented without much regard to the developments that is taking place in many Islamic countries, or when it comes to the type of progressive laws that can be developed in this respect. The type of Islamic law that is being implemented, unfortunately, looks to a woman as a perpetual minor, someone who needs to have a certain kind of guardian regardless, before and afterwards. Now, of course, it's like, if I look at Sharia councils, according to my research, I would see, yes, you have those who will try very much to help women in their difficult situation. And you will have those who are abusing these women. But in general, the framework within which they are working in is one that is inherently discriminatory against women. Specifically, if we know that this type of jurists' opinions were promulgated in a certain period between the 7th and the 10th century. And from that perspective, I believe it reflects the social norms, the historical perspective of that time. It's very interesting that we would like to take the most rigid interpretation of Islamic law here in Britain and disregard all the developments that are taking place in other countries of Islamic faith that more or less are helping women.
Okay, thank you very much. Maryam Namazi.
Thank you for having me here. I represent One Law for All. It's a coalition of organizations including Southall Black Sisters, Iranian Kurdish Women's Rights Organization, Center for Secular Space, and British Muslims for Secular Democracy, as well as other groups. So we include Muslim, non-Muslim women who are working together on this issue. We believe that Sharia courts play a very negative role in the lives of women. We think that in content and structure it is discriminatory against women, and to try to find good or bad when the law itself discriminates against women is problematic. We think that women should have access to one secular law for all. I think one of the things is that if you look at the creation of these Sharia courts, they come in the mid-80s. They are a result of the rise of the political Islamic movement internationally, as well as the repercussions of which we've seen here in Britain and in Europe too. So if you talk to older women who've been living in Britain prior to this period, none of them were required to go to a Sharia court
or were pressured into going to them, or there was no need for this sort of divorce. In the past, they would get civil divorces. Civil divorces are acceptable in Pakistan, in Iran, and elsewhere. So, in a sense, we see this as part of the rise of the Islamist movement. It is one of their projects to manage and control women. And they've created a problem, and then they come forward and pretend that they are the solution to the problem that they've created. So I think it's highly problematic. I think we need to look fundamentally at why women from minority backgrounds should have different rights and rules applied to them. Why are we not stressing one law for all? And I think any sort of religious law, not just Sharia courts, the Bethdins, any sort of parallel legal system where religious arbitration is at play, you will find that women will be discriminated against because of the nature of these sort of rules.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to bring in the other committee members to ask questions to follow up that. What I would say is don't feel the need to answer every question unless the committee member is directing the question at you and asking you specifically to respond. Ms. Ratghani.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming along today to give evidence. I think all of you agree that the primary reason that people go to Sharia council is to achieve a divorce, and the majority of people going forward are probably women. So we're all agreed on that. So if a woman is going forward to achieve a Sharia divorce, she is seeking a divorce from male Sharia counsellors or imams. Those are the overriding people that can decide that for her. A panel of men. Zlakha, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I was going to say it would depend on which Sharia council you go to and who makes up the panel. And that's one of the issues that we have got in this country at the moment, that a lot of the Islamic Sharia councils have majority men. So internally, for us as Muslim women, that's something that we're fighting for.
It's an issue.
Yeah.
But it will be the male imams that can provide the divorce for the woman. There's no council in the UK where a woman can provide a divorce for a woman.
Yeah, so this is, I guess, a question for, I know because you've got the third panel, is the role that women play. So at the moment, whether you go to the mosque or the Sharia council or the individual imam, it is men, and we think that women need to play a key role in the decision making and not just act in an advisory capacity. So this is one of the recommendations that we're making in terms of many recommendations for Sharia councils, that women need to be involved in the decision making. Yes,
the women to be involved in the decision making is one issue. So if a woman is going forward to achieve a divorce, she may have gone through a difficult marriage, she might already be vulnerable, she may have already been abused at the hands of men, and then she has to go and present her case to another panel of men and justify why she needs to achieve a divorce. Do you think that's a reasonable thing for a woman to go through?
Well, this is one of the things our research has shown as well as the testimonies that we've gathered, is that the Iranian Kurdish Women's Rights Organization, for example, with the cases that they've received, they found that the process of these courts itself is tantamount to abuse, because it continues to perpetrate the sort of abuse that the women have faced. It justifies very often the domestic violence they faced. Very often women are told to stay silent, they're not allowed to speak and defend themselves. The aim of the councils are very often to keep the family together, because don't forget, men have a unilateral right to divorce, which is why women are going to these councils. And women's right to divorce is very limited. If the husband refuses to give her a divorce because he can marry more than one wife, she then needs a khula divorce, where she actually has to give up all of the financial dowry involved in order to get that divorce and be free. So in a sense, it is stacked up against women.
It can be. The khula divorce can be discussed on either side. I know that Shaista wants to come in, but I just want to get back to the point. If a woman wants to get a khula divorce where she tries to achieve the divorce, it will be a male that allows her to get that. There is no female that can allow her to have a divorce. I'm just trying to put together a scene of when she enters a room and tries to bid to be able to get divorced, especially if she's a vulnerable woman, already been abused at the hands of men, and then she's to pitch to another panel of men to achieve a divorce.
With the one exception in Birmingham Sharia Council, where you have one woman who is basically present during
present, but she's not the most senior person on the panel.
And that's what I wanted also to add to this point, is basically, even if you had women in these Sharia councils. And these women are using the same frame, the frame of reference. We have a problem.
Well, I just want to get onto that. There's a huge amount of work that's been done in this country over the last 50 or 60 years, and we've got a lot of lawyers on the panel, so hopefully I'm not going to make any mistakes. But marital rape exemption was in 1991, and the Conservative government did a huge amount of work last year on psychological abuse within relationships, controlling and coercive behaviour. Now, if you require a man to give you a divorce under Sharia law, is that not already coercive and controlling behaviour? It's just a question I would like to discuss.
Okay, so in terms of divorce, I think we need an educational campaign on this issue of marriage and divorce. Actually, let's get to the root of the problem, because we're putting a sticky plaster on trying to fix the divorce process. When a Muslim woman gets married, she has the Islamic marriage certificate. That has lots of conditions in there. One thing that's not happening, that's a Muslim woman's Islamic right to have a condition inserted in there, delegated right to divorce. If that is inserted in there, a Muslim woman can actually divorce her husband without the involvement of her husband. He doesn't need his agreement, and she does not need the agreement or involvement of the Sharia Council. So let's start there. Let's get all the mosques up and down the country to insert that condition. Half of your, or much of your problem is gone. And when it comes to the actual divorce service, the other big problem that's happening in the Sharia councils, and I feel like they need an education on Islam sometimes, and you don't need a PhD, you just need to look at the law. They quite often will make the woman go through the khula divorce, which is what Maryam was talking about. But actually, if someone has gone through domestic abuse, that's the fault of a man. She can get that through fasq, which is just called a different title, but what that means is she doesn't have to pay any compensation, doesn't have to pay any marriage gift. She can be released from that marriage very quickly, without any mediation, without any pressure. It's just that the Sharia councils are not following that, and they sort of put her onto the khula process, which then, if the husband disputes it, then they bring into the fact that
Yes, but if we have one rule of law in this country that says there is controlling and coercive behaviour, and if women are then having to pitch and bid to a Sharia council to be divorced, is that Sharia council complicit in controlling and coercive behaviour, as is her husband that won't divorce her?
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I think the problem is too, if we look at the testimonies of the women that we have been getting, there is a huge amount of coercion and pressure. You have testimonies of Shaista, for example, saying that she was, because she supported her daughter's right to get a divorce from her husband in a civil court, that the ex-husband went and said that she is committing zina. And it's sort of this pressure of zina laws, adultery laws, that are then used to shame women and sort of coerce them into going to these courts. And when her daughter did go to these courts, she talks about how she was not listened to, the violence that she faced was ignored. She was at a shelter, and the Sharia court gave her address to the husband, who the British court had found to have committed violence, and she had an order of protection for herself. So in many instances, we do see that there's one theoretical discussion, but in practice, we're seeing that it is very coercive towards women.
Okay, Zlakha, Ahmed, do you want to come in?
I suppose I just wanted to come in and say that in terms of the women that we've put forward and the Islamic Sharia councils that we worked with and the divorces that they've obtained, as soon in the paperwork we state the domestic violence that the woman has gone through. The divorces have been automatic. So for the past 12 years, there was not even a meeting that was called. The paperwork would come through the post. So in terms of a woman actually having to go and meet a man and tell her story, that wasn't actually happening with the cases that we were dealing with.
I just want to raise one campaign that's been taking place in India. You might be already across it. It's run by Muslim women in India who are very concerned about the triple talaq. And I know that Shaista, you've sent a letter into the committee with 100 signatories with your concerns. So this project, this charity, which is supported by 30,000 Muslim members, Muslim women, and this campaign is supported by 70,000 women who are concerned about the parallel legal systems that are placed in India, where a Muslim woman is treated under Sharia and where a non-Muslim woman in India is not treated under Sharia, and the issue of triple talaq came up. So my question is, if we do not deal with Sharia councils, will we end up with a parallel legal system, whereas already in a country like India, where you have 70,000 women saying that they are being gender discriminated, that could be a position that we might end up in here.
Can I just say that I think we need to not propel the myth of parallel legal system. The word legal means legally binding, and when you go to a Sharia council, their decisions and opinions are not legally binding, and it's a voluntary code that we want to go there, we want to follow. Women voluntarily go there. Yes, some women may be forced to go there, but the vast majority of women actually want to get out of that religious and faith-based marriage themselves, unless you're saying actually Muslim women do not have a Muslim marriage, do not believe in Islam, they're going to have a faith-based marriage. So the only way that they get out, and this is not about a parallel legal system. A Muslim woman, she'll go there to have her religious divorce, then she'll go to the civil courts if she's got a civil marriage to get a civil divorce. So she's using two systems. But what we're saying is we're trying to actually encourage more women to get a civil marriage. And because we can't really do that fast enough, we do actually think one of our solutions is actually make it compulsory. Have your civil marriage before you can have a religious marriage. Then at least then the Muslim woman, when her union breaks down, she can go to the civil courts, get her civil divorce. Then we need a campaign to educate everybody that civil divorce should count as an Islamic divorce as well. That's going to take time. And eventually you will end up with a situation somewhere down the line where Muslim women will be less reliant on Sharia councils, more reliant on the British justice system. But obviously this is where the government needs to step in. And actually, most Sharia councils will be redundant in the future. Surely this is a more pragmatic approach.
I think they are actually parallel legal systems because they call themselves courts, they call themselves judges. They imply that they are. I'm sorry if you don't mind not interrupting me. So they do call themselves courts. They do call themselves judges. And that's what a parallel legal system means. It doesn't necessarily have to have, the force of the law behind it, but they do imply that they are the law. And they do tell women, if they don't abide by these rules, that they are not proper Muslims. And I think this is one of the things that Islamists do. They make it seem as if there's one Sharia law, it's the Sharia, and people who don't abide it are apostates and so on and so forth.
I know everybody's itching to come in. I'm going to just keep moving on to the other committee members. If you haven't had a chance to make your point at the end, I'll give you a chance in case there's any sort of burning points you feel you haven't responded to. Just one question from James Berry, and then I'm going to David Winnick.
Yeah, thank you for having it so far. I just have one quick question. I think you'll agree that if the system was changed so that if you get a civil divorce in the courts, you are automatically entitled to a rubber stamping from the Sharia Council. Well, I agree. It ought to happen, but you're all agreed on that.
Yeah.
But what would happen if there wasn't a civil marriage in place, so there's only a religious marriage? How would you then say the system should be reformed to make it as easy? It should, no more difficult for a woman in a religious marriage to get out of a civil marriage through the High Court in England.
So at the moment, yes, there are women who that's their only option. Okay, so because some women do get that discriminatory treatment, we can look at various types of what happens as examples. They need to raise their standards, and there's a number of things that they could do. First of all, when they question the woman, don't question her in a way that she makes her feel guilty for wanting a divorce. Sometimes they ask for evidence, and you can't always provide evidence of abuse if it's emotional abuse, and that can actually traumatise the person even further. If you don't even know where your husband lives, sometimes again they ask for evidence before you can get out of the marriage, then you're going to be stuck. We need more women, obviously, on the decision-making part and collecting the actual cases, which is what you were talking about, Nusrat. We also need policies and procedures around safeguarding. So if they spot anything in terms of a safeguarding issue, it needs to be reported to the police. We need transparency. So if you actually go on a lot of the Sharia Council or mosque websites, you don't even know who is dealing with your divorce case. So they need to be listed with their biographies, not with pen names, but actually with their proper names, because sometimes people have dual names as well. Where I think maybe the government could help is, and it can't be just Sharia councils, it's got to be mosques and imams who perform the Sharia divorce service, is draw up a really strong code of conduct. And we've produced a report with a whole load of recommendations for Sharia councils in there. And then maybe the government could draw up a list of those who actually follow all that best practice, so there is no discrimination. Then at least when women's groups get calls on our helpline, and we get plenty, and the lawyers get calls as well, we know where to refer them to. And if they breach that code of practice, you take them off, but at least you know where you're referring them to. And then if that doesn't work, I think the government can then start looking at some kind of monitoring or regulation. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to go too much into that. At the same time, strengthen civil law.
Okay. I'm going to just go. I'm going to move on. If you haven't had a chance to make it in response to the other questions.
I didn't have time to respond to this question, please. Because with all due respect, I understand, you have different types of women going to the Sharia court, why they're going. Okay? And that said, I think the government has a responsibility right now to register all of these marriages because they are left unprotected.
Okay, I will give you a chance at the end. Any further questions you feel like you haven't had a chance to respond to, I suspect the other committee's questions will give you the chance to do so anyway. David Winnick.
Since I'm not involved in religion in any way, I'm obviously not overjoyed about religious courts, but in all fairness, this is not, Sharia courts deal obviously with Islamic issues and as they see it, but other religions in the United Kingdom, as I understand it, have similar courts, and there doesn't seem to be a great deal of controversy. So the question is, why should, leaving aside the question how it should be composed, I'm coming to that in a moment, but why should Islam be the only religion which is denied what other religions have, like Jews, as I understand it, Sikhs and Hindus?
Yes.
Can you answer that one?
Can I respond to that? I just wanted to thank the panel for inviting, I suppose, me and my organisation, our experiences, because one of the frustrations we're facing at the moment is that in terms of this issue, we are finding that it's non-Muslims, other people who are talking on our behalf. So yeah, I'm grateful for this opportunity just to be able to put our views forward.
Dr. Manea?
I just wanted basically to say you're very right when it comes to why are we focusing on Islam. As I believe the law of the land should apply to everybody regardless of faith. That means even the other court should also be under the civil law. That said, at the same time, why are we talking about this? It's like I'm of Islamic faith myself. I practice my religion, I lead prayers. But that said, I also understand that my Islamic law needs reform. And until that happens, when you leave them into a system that basically exploits the most vulnerable, there is a kind of a responsibility of care by the state. This is not fulfilled. It's like, with all due respect, we are throwing the ball to you because as a British government, you have a responsibility to protect the most vulnerable in society. These are left without protection, specifically if their marriages are not registered.
If I can take you up on that, and fortunately for some of us at least, we're not the government, the present government, so but we make recommendations to the government, obviously.
I hope you will.
So would I be right in saying it's not a question of abolition of these Sharia courts, but reform, simply because you've given all four of you, if I may say so, without being patronising, very strong evidence how they're prejudiced against women, and which is clearly unacceptable. So it's basically reform that you want, not abolition. Am I right?
Yes, but reform, with all due respect, the one reform that you see in Islamic laws have in Islamic country like Tunisia, these reforms have rendered Sharia court redundant. They do not use Sharia courts. The reform that we see in Tunisia, man and wife, husband and wife, both of them, they go to a civil law and they get a divorce on equal terms. That is Islamic law in Tunisia. Why do we have to have another system here? I think we all agree that what we would like...
But that would take time, wouldn't it? That would take time.
That will take time, but until that happens, we need safeguards and we need also to end this practice.
But that's where I would come in. I understand what you're saying. And going back to, in terms of our organisation, If the women that we've supported were not able to go to the Islamic Sharia Council, they would still be in those abusive marriages. And what we're saying is that's not acceptable. So if for them the only way out has been to get the Islamic Sharia divorce, which has enabled them to move on and live their life in safety and freedom, then that's why we're advocating.
Let me just let David come in with one more question.
Sorry. Without possible legislation, and obviously governments would, all governments, whichever colour, would be hesitant when it comes to legislation. But be that as it may, are you pessimistic of the chances of reform being taken voluntarily, bearing in mind clearly what you've been saying, that these courts are so male-dominated and discriminatory against women?
I also think that we can't wait for reform and changes. I think that's an issue that we need to think about. We need to protect women, and we need to protect them right away. And I think from my perspective, and the coalition I work with, is we think that parallel legal systems should be abolished because abolish, because I think it will protect women more. I know some will say that, well, that means that they'll carry on underground. Well, domestic violence continues, but we still have laws against it. I think when the government says very clearly that parallel legal systems are unacceptable, it helps to protect the most vulnerable. Because yes, there are some women who go freely, they get their rights, but we're talking about the most vulnerable in our society.
Okay,
but you're not in favour.
I'm going to move on.
You're not in favour of abolition.
Well, then coming back to for women, that faith is important, and faith is the integral, the most important thing in their life.
Thank you. I'm going to move
on. It will go underground.
I'm going to move on. Raja Jayawardena.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Ahmed, you said that the current situation is unacceptable, and yet, Ms. Gohir, you said that any change will take time. Why should it take time if it is unacceptable?
Well, look, okay, so if the solution is let's abolish them tomorrow, that is not going to actually fix the problem overnight, because a Muslim woman who wants to get out of that marriage, she's going to want a Sharia divorce service. So she's going to then start going to individual imams who are going to increase their prices. There'll be less transparency, even more discrimination. So how is that actually overnight going to fix the problem?
But if it's unacceptable, why should we tolerate any set of separate jurisdiction under Sharia law? Because
it's going to make the current... So if you're saying it's not acceptable, then the answer is yeah. So, but there's no quick fix, because the quick fix, I'm assuming, would be abolish it. That actually makes the situation worse for the very women who you're trying to help. And actually, we're talking about Muslim women, so they should be at the heart of the solution. So when you talk about DV victim, CSE victim, you put them at the heart of the solution. But because it's a matter of faith and Muslim women, I feel in a way Muslim women are being talked at, and the solutions that we've put forward in this very lengthy report actually talks about raising the standards for Sharia councils. That can be done immediately. Why can't that be done immediately? While at the same time strengthening civil law, as then Muslim women start to use civil law more, and that bit is going to take time. That's the reality of law, isn't it?
But Dr. Manea, I mean, isn't it true that actually the reforms to Sharia councils have to come from within, if they are going to remain part of, in effect, a legal system, have to come from within Muslim communities across this country? And actually, the reality is that elsewhere this is not true. As you represented, you made the case earlier for Tunisia, that actually they accept there that actually civil law should be at the heart of every decision.
And that means that if we are to solve the problems here, we need changes in the legislation. What does that mean? That means that we have to register all religious marriages, okay? And at the same time, and this is like your suggestion that we have civil marriage before, I agree with that 100%. That said, now the issue is, I am for the end of this Sharia court system. In my opinion, it's not going to be reformed for the very mere reason that we understand that very often they represent a fundamentalist interpretation of Islamic law. That said, on the other hand, in order to solve the problem afterwards, once they come and they would like, because women will want to have a religious divorce. How do we deal with that? And I documented that in several cases in countries, they accept a civil divorce as a religious divorce. We could basically make sure that within our system here, in the civil law, here, that it is done automatically without a need for a Sharia council.
So you were saying that essentially we must make it compulsory for everyone to register their marriages in the civil system,
yes,
regardless of any religious ceremony that they might have.
Yes, it's very important because it will cause a lot of trouble. But that said, on the long run, we will solve the problems. But at the same time, we are trying to protect the woman because this situation is not sustainable. This is not sustainable.
I need to
yes, no answer.
Very quickly then.
Yes, no answer, please, from everyone. Would you agree that everyone should be treated the same under English law?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Nazshah.
There's a couple of questions really, but first, Doctor, can I just pick up what you've said? The law of a land should apply to all, were your words. Isn't that the case as it is, as far as I'm concerned? If I walk out and commit a crime, or I walk out and break the law of this land, it will apply to me whether I'm black, white, male, female. The law of a land does apply to all, doesn't it?
Not when it comes to
sorry,
councils.
it's a yes or no. Am I right in saying the law of this land applies to everybody equally? The legal system in this country?
It should be. It's not done.
Okay. So that brings me on to the next question. So I enjoy two cultures. I'm British, I'm Muslim. If I just use my Britishness, I can actually have a relationship and live with somebody, not have marriage, have a civil partnership, and that's open to me. Am I right? Mm-hmm. As a Muslim, I choose my code of conduct if I choose to have a nikah, and that's my choice. Mm-hmm. So why should that be governed by the state? If that's my code of conduct, I'm trying to understand why should that? Why should anybody govern my choices, whether I decide to live with a partner, whether I decide to... Doesn't that actually go against human rights? And you're telling me, you're talking to me about human rights?
I'm very glad that you're using the word human rights, because the issue here, the core of it, human rights. How do we support and protect women? You and I, we both practice our religion. When we got married, we had a nikah. I had a nikah. But that said, I know very well that these systems are voluntary. I know that I could opt out. A woman in a closed society, in closed community, who doesn't know her rights, these women are left vulnerable to the system. So from this perspective, it's not about human rights here. It's like the protection of the human rights of these. A system that allows the most vulnerable to be exploited is not a fair system. And that's the problem of the issue, the core of the issue.
So rather than abolishing the system, because I make a choice, I'm an informed person whose mother served 14 years for killing an abusive partner. I've led a campaign with staff for Black Sisters for 20 years ago. I'm speaking from my experience, having been forced into marriage at 15 years old. I make a choice to choose my religion. So why should the state be policing my choices as a Muslim woman? And what I'm hearing is that to abolish all of that takes away my human right to have a choice.
No.
So how do I explain that to Muslim women in my constituency? It wouldn't wash.
No, it's a very good argument. But that said, with all due respect, what we are saying, we would like to regulate the right to have a religious divorce in a way that protect the woman.
I'm all for protection, but I'm just not for the abolition. I'm just not.
Do you mind if I just say something as well? I think the thing is, there's a difference between the right to religion, which obviously people have, versus the right to religious courts. As some Muslim women who are part of our campaign say, Sharia courts are not the sixth pillar of Islam. There are lots of Muslim women who do not go to Sharia courts. They are still good Muslims. My point is that, we're talking about abolishing a system that is portraying itself To the government, it says we're just a mediation body, but to the women who go to it, they say their rules are binding. There's no right to appeal. If they don't listen to the rulings, that they are not proper Muslims, they're accused of zina and adultery and all sorts of other things.
I have two questions for you, Mr. Namazi. One is, the first one is just a yes or no. You talk about parallel legal system. Is it right that any decision made by any Sharia council, is it legally binding in this country according to the law of this land? Yes or no?
Well, it doesn't matter if it's legally binding.
I'm just asking for a yes or no
answer. There is no yes or no. Because
there is. It's not legally binding.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Can I just move on to my next one?
It doesn't matter if it's not legally binding, because for the women, and especially the vulnerable women who go to them...
So it's not a parallel legal system then, is it?
It is, because the law of God is the most... it can be the most frightening thing to disobey the rule of God. And when you go to a court of God, and where they say that the rules are divine, and if you don't abide by these rules, you can go to hell, you're committing zina, you're committing apostasy.
Mr. Namazi, according to your blog, which I read
very
earlier,
dangerous and difficult.
According to the blog that I read earlier, this isn't just about Sharia courts. If we were to look at your implementation of the view of the world, we wouldn't have any. The majority of the discrimination would be faced by the 33 million Christians in this country, because you'd have a way with Christianity, you'd have a way with, and this is according to your blog, with any religious institution.
This is not about, no.
But it is, isn't it?
No,
because what you're saying is you're denying everybody's religious human rights.
People have a right to religion or not having a religion. However, it doesn't mean because you're a Christian you need to go to an ecclesiastic court for your divorce. If you're Jewish, you have to go to the Beth Din. If you're Muslim, you have to go to the Sharia court. If you're Hindu, you have to go to some Hindutva court. The point is that we are first and foremost citizens in this country. There are rights that have been fought for over centuries for women. Where they have equal rights, where their testimony is not worth half that of a man's, where men don't have unilateral rights to divorce, where women have to go through a million loopholes to get their basic right, where domestic violence by some of the Sharia judges is considered fine, where the judge will ask the woman, well, did you ask him why he beats you? Is it because you didn't cook dinner, or is it because you're going out with your friends? Where you have a Sharia judge saying that marital rape is not a crime, it's not an act of aggression. Calling it rape is the act of aggression. In this situation, clearly there's a problem.
Agree.
So it's not an attack on the right of religion, so please don't make it such.
I agree. I'll make my final point. I absolutely agree that we have inequalities in the Sharia system. I absolutely agree one woman abused is one too many. I absolutely hold those values absolutely run through me. What I don't agree, and what I'm looking at, is in this country, our first female judge was 1967. It was only a few years ago that we referred to young CSE victims as child prostitutes. We go through change. And what we don't do is throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we do is we reform legal systems. That is what we do as lawmakers. So what we do is we listen to people, we listen to their concerns, and we amend the law accordingly. What we don't do is do away with something that a community finds very valuable. And quite frankly, the people that I've been talking to in the last 24 hours certainly have told me that there is an air of Islamophobia about this, there is an air of racism about this whole debate, and that needs to be taken.
Okay. I'm going to...
Because I'm being accused of certain things.
Yeah.
Sorry, the whole debate. Not about you, not about you.
Well, it is because
it's
about the whole
debate.
Can I
just yes, you can come back on it, and then I'm going to move to David Burrows.
I think the fact of the matter is that you can be critical of religious rules and religious courts and do it out of a defense of women's rights. You know, you don't need to be Muslim to, for example, you don't need to be gay to defend gay rights. You don't need to be a migrant to defend the rights of refugees and migrants. And you don't need to be Muslim or, an adherent of these courts to see that there's a problem here. There is a problem. And I think that Islamophobia and this accusation is often used in order to silence any criticism on courts which are highly discriminatory. I think we need to have one law for all. People have a right to religion. They absolutely do. They have a corresponding right to be free from religion as well. We often forget that right. But nonetheless, to say that then we need courts which are looking at the issue of women's rights and the rights in the family from a fundamentalist, from an Islamist perspective, is dangerous, and it is leaving the most vulnerable to the mercy of these courts.
Okay, thank you. David Burrows.
Isn't there a structural problem with Sharia councils that fatwas are used to inform decisions of Sharia councils, and those set precedents. Indeed, they can be transnational. They go beyond this country's own jurisdiction and own approach to law. And so you can have the numerous fatwas, but some could include legitimising polygamy, which would then involve decisions being made by Sharia councils which are illegal and unacceptable to this country. And so there could well be, however much you may want to bridge the gaps with the rights for women and the rest of it, there is this fundamental structural weakness and flaw and problem for Sharia councils which are based on and influenced by fatwas.
How many Sharia councils are issuing fatwas? So I think what we need to do is not look at what's happening across the world, and we need to focus the debate on what we're talking about here today, which is the Sharia councils. And at the end of the day, you know, we talk about who should be talking about what. Everyone can talk about this issue, but actually, not Muslim men, even Muslim women should be leading the debate. Look, if this whole inquiry was about, or this issue was about, say, the discrimination of Jewish women or Sikh women by their religious institutions, I would not feel comfortable leading that debate because I wouldn't really understand their religion or their nuances. I might suggest a solution that actually might not work for them or make it worse for them. But what I would want to do as a women's rights activist, as a human rights activist, is find out what works for them and support them in whatever solution that they wanted that was right for them. In a similar way, what we're saying is Muslim women, people need to ask Muslim women what is it that they want, what do they think will fix this, and then everyone should then support the Muslim women to make that happen. And the end goal is the same, that let's actually remove the discrimination, let's address the discrimination. I think we all agree there's discrimination, I think we're all on the same page. I think where we might differ is how do we tackle it and what the solutions are, but the solutions must work for Muslim women.
Well, are you going to be in control of that from the fatwa that's providing an influence on the decisions made by the council?
But we need to give an example of fatwas in terms of, you know, at the end of the
we
day...
We may all have views and concerns about that. Just ask the rest of the panel on the question.
If I can, I think that's an important point. The fact of the matter is that many of the courts are run by groups that are part of the transnational Islamist movement. So the Deobandis, the Ahl Hadith, which are the Salafis of South Asia. There are clear links with the Islamist movement and these courts, even in our countries. I was born in Iran. The Sharia courts in many of our countries in the Middle East and North Africa and also in Britain have been linked with the rise of that movement. So I think it is of concern. It's not just a British problem. It's something that we're seeing across the board. So you do have the Islamist groups in India, for example, fighting for the right for men to have triple talaq, which Nusrat Ghani mentioned. And you've got groups here fighting for the same right. So there are those links, and they very clearly exist.
Many Sharia councils.
Yes, and then go back to Ahmed.
I just to say, I wanted to bring in Dave. There's lots of things that are being said that I want to react to, which isn't the appropriate time. But this assertion that the reason, for example, I dress the way I do, it's my choice. Yeah. It's not to do with influence of the. Yeah, I'm not conservative.
One at a time.
I'm not conservative. I'm not fundamentalist, and I do have an issue that the local mosque that I belong to in Rotherham are far less practicing in a way than I am. So I do have an issue when a lot of this discussion is bringing in and linking conservatism and fundamentalism with Islamic councils and with the mosques.
It's misogyny.
Dr. Manea and then Shaista Gohir.
For me, it is part of what you were saying, David, earlier. It is to do with Islamophobia. Yeah. So yes, women like myself who are educated, lots of experience, we're choosing, like Nasser, faith is important to us. Many of the women that we're getting are, as well as your housewives, they're also educated women, but the Islamic divorce is very, very important. And for us, back to that, whatever the solution is out of this,
fatwas, as much as you may have you and your personal choices, the fatwas may well set precedents which could be illegal or unacceptable to British citizens, of which we're all part of.
My response,
and so I'm just asking whether, for all the concerns we may have, there may well be a structural flaw that is impossible to get over.
what I would say is that in terms of the solutions for me, it would be to look at, for example, the issue around the Islamic divorce and to have those identified and accepted and put into law, and the issues that aren't compatible not to be looked at.
I'm just worried about a kind of a tendency that every time that someone comes with a legitimate critique of certain practices or groups, that this person will be labeled Islamophobic. But if you may allow me, there is a political dimension to this issue. Whether we like it or not, there is a political dimension to it. The first Sharia Council that was created was in 1982. And if you look at those who created it, these have transnational Islamist movements. Jamaat al-Islamiyya, Salafi movement, all of these. And that said, it came within a context, a political context where Islamism was on the rise. So there is a political dimension to this that we cannot ignore. That said, I'm not excluding the facts that you have, because of the re-Islamization that took place here in Britain, specifically in certain closed communities, that there's a certain kind of need that aroused. And I showed it also in the book, where you have certain people, concerned people, who are trying to solve the problems for women who are stuck in these religious marriages, and they would like to have religious divorces, and they're helping them.
Okay.
So not everybody is an Islamist, but there's an Islamist dimension to this. That said, at the same time, yes, a religious divorce is important.
Okay.
For someone, and please, because it's like, not all, this discussion shouldn't only be led by women of faith.
It's about us.
Okay.
No, it's about citizens.
I'm going to have to hold you to it. I've let this panel run on because I think your evidence is all extremely important and I think has been very illuminating. But I do still want to take Chukramoon and then Tim Lawton before we move on to the next panel.
Thank you all for coming to give evidence. This is an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I don't want you to presuppose that any of my questions reveal my own thoughts on this. I come to this with an open mind. Can I, first of all, start with you, Musco? You said that this isn't a parallel legal system, and it shouldn't be seen as such, and these are councils and not courts. If that is the case, why is there a need to translate across a civil divorce into the way in which the Sharia councils operate, if there isn't a degree of a parallel operation, if you like?
Sorry, so what do you mean by that? In terms
so you're
of
saying that you're saying it's not a parallel system, but you are saying that the force of a civil divorce needs to be recognised by the Sharia councils. Do you see the conflict between those two statements?
I don't, because if in Islam there are certain principles, and if you look at the principles that are followed when you actually go through a civil divorce, actually that is the process a very similar process. So actually, it counts as an Islamic divorce. So we're saying, actually, why go through the same process? If it didn't, then obviously we wouldn't. So,
but that's your. I hope you don't mind me cutting, just because I want to get to the nub of this matter. But that's your interpretation of whether or not a civil divorce sits easily with the perception of what a Sharia divorce would be. That's your perception. But it seems from the evidence that has been given, to some extent, you all have said that there are different interpretations given to Sharia law by different councils. And so that might be your view, but others may come to a different view because they have a different interpretation.
I think that, in all honesty, I think a lot of Sharia councils will probably agree that it probably is, the civil divorce does count.
Right.
Hence, if you go to a lot of them, they will say, go and get that first.
Okay.
Yeah?
All right.
Go and get that first, then come to us, because it actually makes their process a lot quicker.
Let me just give it... I'm just going to cut you just because, as the chair said, we don't have that much time.
Oh.
So, going back to this this argument that there is a conflict between Sharia and UK law, as it were. I mean, I am a lawyer by training, but I'm not a family lawyer or matrimonial lawyer. But it seems to me that, and I'm probably mispronouncing this, people mispronounce my name all the time, so maybe this gives me permission to mispronounce it, but the tulak, the concept of the tulak, which, by which I understand it, the man can get a unilateral divorce on his own initiative. Now, that isn't something I think we have in UK divorce law, and clearly those two concepts don't necessarily sit easily with each other. Would you at least concede that there is a conflict there between Sharia and UK law?
So can I actually, it'd be good to give an example of a case study. So we've got a case study, came in last Wednesday. Her husband has actually gone through the civil, he's the petitioner, so he's given her the divorce. Now, if you look at what happens in Islam, he can say...
In the council,
So he could actually, there's different ways. So he could just divorce her, he could go to the council and get a certificate. If it was a Muslim country, he could go to the court. In fact, in some Muslim countries, a man can't just give an instantaneous divorce, he would have to go through the court system. But it's him saying, I want to divorce you for whatever reason. So in this particular case study that we've got from last Wednesday, he's the petitioner, she's got the decree absolute. She's now gone to the Sharia Council, and if he's given her a divorce, and actually it's in writing, and the bare minimum in Islam, you could even give it verbally, that should count, that should suffice, and they know that. Yet they made her go through the process, not because they think that doesn't count, they want to earn a fee, because they're going to miss out on a fee of £400. At best, what they could probably say is, we know this counts, for a bit of an admin fee to give you a certificate, we could charge you £40, £50, but they don't, because it's £400 that they're missing out.
That still doesn't get around the point that I'm making, which is that the tulak is not a concept that we have in the way it is understood in Sharia law, in UK law. But anyway, Dr. Manea, you said, and this picks up on my questioning about the interpretation, that I quote you, say, they very often represent a fundamentalist interpretation of Islam. That was your description of these Sharia councils. Yes. How on earth are you measuring that? Where's your evidence for that?
Because you have a certain kind of a spectrum on where you stand when it comes to Islamic law. Okay?
I understand that, but how are you measuring it?
I'm looking at the type of evidence, the kind of decision that they are taking. I'll give you one example. No. I'll give you one example.
Sorry, what I'm asking for is empirical evidence to support that very general sweeping statement about all Sharia council. So I don't want you all four of you will be able to give us untold numbers of case studies, which is very useful. But what I'm asking for here is, what is the empirical evidence behind your claim that Sharia councils often represent a fundamentalist interpretation of Islam?
You just have to look at all the type of verdicts that are being done within these Islamic Sharia councils.
Has someone counted this?
Well, actually, it's just that you could actually look at them through the type of testimonies that we have from frontline organizations, that basically when you are declined your Islamic divorce, despite the fact that you have a civil divorce, that's an indication that is a fundamentalist interpretation.
Sure. But my point is, you don't actually have empirical data to support what you're saying. You can't tell us this percentage of findings by Sharia Council are fundamentalist. And it goes back to the question of, well, what is fundamentalist? That is a very subjective judgment. And let me go to my final question before the chair cuts me off.
If I may say,
please respond to that before I ask my final question.
How do you describe a progressive Islamic interpretation?
Well, you tell me.
Well, I'll tell you. It's something that allows us to have equal right in front of the law. Treat us not as minor, okay? We have experiences in different Islamic countries where I did research, in Arabian Peninsula, in Syria, in South African courts, Muslim under Islamic law, and in here. Now I am in a position to compare between the types of verdicts that one has in certain countries and what we are having here in Britain.
But my final question goes to this, actually. You did, just as you said it, I thought, actually, here's another contradiction in what you're saying. Because your complaint seems to be that we shouldn't be treating women as minors.
Yes.
But at the same time, you're suggesting that many women are not aware that they do not have to abide by the findings of the Sharia Council because they do not have knowledge of the UK law and their rights in the way that many other people would have. Now, some might say that's a bit patronising. I'm not saying that I'm saying that, but could you respond to that? And secondly, isn't really the issue here is a question to which Muslim women are aware of their rights under UK law, and to achieve what you're seeking to achieve, and I don't think anybody in this room would disagree with your concerns about ensuring that people's human rights are protected, is that in the end it is about the knowledge of the woman about her legal rights. And surely it would be more perhaps productive to focus on that rather than focusing on abolishing or Sharia councils or kind of, to take now Shah's description, throwing the baby out of the bathwater.
Is it patronising? Is it patronising
Mm.
to demand that? No, it's not. It's like, why? It's like, we're talking about women working from within communities. Women working from within communities. And from women working within communities, you wrote a report once about the sexual abuse. You talked about the shame. You talked about the kind of burden of honor. You have a system in closed communities where women are the bearer of shame and honor. And in that system, women, you expect them to make choices, informed choices. You know, rather, we know what's happening there. So in order for us actually to talk about, not to patronize us, I would suggest that we have one law for all that protect us, but in a way that respect also our religious rights. It's like, I would like
this point of knowledge being
I think we need to move on.
Can I just say that we've actually produced a booklet telling
you can send that in afterwards, but I really need to move on. I'm going to need to move on. We need to take. I need to take Tim Lawton's. We've run this evidence session already for an hour. I'm going to take Tim Lawton's questions, and then we're going to move on to the next session. And I thank everybody for their patience.
Can I just ask a simple question without instigating a debate? What changes to the marriage law could be made to reduce the dependence on and demand for Sharia councils in this country at the moment?
I'm asking for two things. One is, which I keep saying, which is to make a civil marriage compulsory before the before the Islamic, and that would mean that if an imam did not get the evidence, he couldn't perform it, and if he did perform that without any evidence, he would get fined, and they'd soon stop doing it. And the second thing is an amendment.
Offence to perform that.
Absolutely, they would get fined. They'd soon stop doing it, and actually that helps sort out the issue of polygamy, because I feel that anecdotally that's on the rise. That's another issue. And the other one is the amending the Divorce Religious Marriages Act 2002, because at the moment that only applies to Jewish women. Now that won't help every Muslim woman, but it will help some Muslim women, because what the judge can do is, sometimes what happens is that the husband will kind of say to the Muslim woman, I won't contest the religious divorce if you give me a more favourable settlement in the civil court of law in terms of custody and finance. And then what then happens is the woman will comply just to speed up her religious divorce. Now actually, if we amended that act, the judge could then withhold the civil divorce, ensure that man gives her the divorce. It'd be actually cheaper for her as well if he instigates the divorce. She'd save money as well, and save the trauma of going through the religious divorce.
So those changes could virtually eliminate the need for Sharia.
I think eventually they'd become redundant, because you wouldn't really need, maybe for the odd case where
you don't need the Sharia courts right now either. You didn't need them before 1982.
We're not asking whether you need them or not. We're asking they exist. Whether or not you think there's a need for them. They exist. So what would, as we've had an answer from Shaista about, what would eliminate their purpose at all?
But also, I think we shouldn't forget the fact that these courts are violating women's rights as we speak, and that is something that needs to be addressed.
Okay, that's not the question.
Separate from any laws that need to be changed. Let me go on to a second
point, because there was a study of Muslim women living in the West Midlands which revealed that of those who consider themselves married, 90% were not in marriages legally recognised by English law, and worryingly, over half of those women were not aware that they did not have the same rights as they would with a civil marriage. Why is there such, inverted commas, ignorance about the status of these marriages?
You have a situation where basically women are either not informed, they don't know, for instance, that if they married outside of the country, that their marriage is covered by the international private law. So it is recognized here. And that uncertainty, lack of information, is causing a big problem. In addition, you have a situation where sometimes you have men and women are getting into a marriage, a religious marriage, but they want to test the situation. They want to test a relationship. Mostly, however, you have a situation where men are deliberately misleading women when it comes to their rights. And more or less, it's a deliberate attempt to hinder the woman of being protected under the civil law.
Okay, so what is being done to counter women being misled that they are in a marriage which has the same safeguards as a civil marriage in this country?
I believe there are several measures that should be done.
Yes, what is being done?
It's just like you have
there are lots of women's rights groups that are working to
on the
protect
ground.
vulnerable women, from Southall Black Sisters to Iranian Women's Kurdish Group.
Okay, so what's the estimate of how many of these unregistered marriages actually are in the UK?
We don't have numbers, unfortunately. But
part of the issue maybe that hasn't been raised is back when we were saying that spirituality and faith matters. So for a lot of women, even if they're educated, what they don't realise is the protection that the civil
can we go back to my question about how many do we estimate of these unregistered marriages there actually
on the
are?
helpline,
and therefore an awful lot of those women are under a delusion that they are protected by the law, which clearly they are not.
No one knows the precise figures, so we've tried to have a go at trying to give an estimate. So when people call the helpline and they're calling about divorce or Sharia divorce, we ask them the question, is your marriage legally valid? Because if they've been married from abroad, which is a part of the confusion, because those nikahs or Islamic marriages abroad are legally recognised here, but the Islamic marriages here are not. So we tried to, and then we've sort of found that according to our statistics, probably about maybe 40% of the cases we deal with, they're not in legally recognised marriages. And that kind of tallies up with, I think, Birmingham Central Mosque look at their case studies and their divorce cases, and they've come up with a similar figure. I'm not saying it is 30 to 40%, but it's probably thereabouts.
So it's a large portion.
Large portion.
And what is that in actual number terms?
I don't know how many. I don't know what the population of the Muslim community are married. It'd be good to, I think, when the civil registry probably record faith as well. Probably do better data collection.
Okay, so there's no empirical research. But
unfortunately, and maybe we should try to do that.
Can I thank all of you for giving evidence and also for your patience, because we have run this session considerably longer than we had scheduled. That was partly because all of your evidence has been immensely illuminating. I'm just going to ask you one sentence in conclusion. What do you think the government should do? Just one sentence.
Register all religious marriages.
Sorry, I'm taking turns. Zlakha, Ahmed.
I'd agree with what Dr. Manea just said, yeah.
Register.
Yes. Accountability of Sharia councils and strengthen civil law and put Muslim women at the heart of the solutions that work for them.
Maryam, Namazi?
I think Muslim women are not a homogeneous group. We have to look at citizenship and the fact that these courts are violating people's rights. I think what the government should do is just show that it has no tolerance for parallel legal systems.
Okay, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and your evidence. Thank you. You can leave it all to the committee. That'd be really helpful.